name is Alyssa.
And I'm Tony.
And we are the Soultry Sisters. We're a community-based organization that empowers women to live healthy and creative lives in North County, San Diego, and recently, DC.
We curate events, workshops, mixers, and meetups centered around women's arts, wellness, and sisterhood.
Our mission is to empower women to live vibrant and shine bright through creative expression and conscious holistic living.
Our vision is to create a safe space that provides women the arts and wellness resources that are affordable and accessible.
So far, we've partnered with Dancing Soul Boutique, Village Rock Shop, Carlsbad Village Yoga Co-op, and nonprofit organization Leap to Success. To find out more information about us and to sign up for our future events, visit SoultrySisters.com.
You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Soultry Sisters.
We hope to see you soon.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. This is our Soultry Hangout. So excited to see you all.
Hey, happy Wednesday. So we always like to start our hangout by welcoming you all for tuning in. And we welcome you to share with us what you are sipping on and where you are tuning in from.
You're gonna go. You're already sipping. You
Yes,
think?
This is hot off the stove. I am sipping on some green tea with honey in my Philippine mug. And I'm tuning in from San Diego. That's where I'm at. In my room.
In my room. Hey everyone, so I'm Tony, the other half of Soultry Sisters. So I'm sipping on some hibiscus and tulsi tea, but I have like the tulsi bags and like hibiscus leaves in here.
Oh,
With
nice.
honey, and then some calamansi Philippine lemon as well. So it's very yummy and
Hey,
delightful.
way to keep it themed.
Very tropical. And
Yes.
then I'm tuning in from the DC area. It's on the East Coast. That's why I'm more cozied up with my little turtleneck and my tea because it's cold. It was raining today. I was like, why?
It's nice and sunny out here in San Diego. So we the rain has gone. So if you're tuning in live, let us know. We got some comments in here. We have gonna put it on the screen. We have Kyle Moore checking in from Whedon. Yes, continue my sponsorship with Gold Peak CBT. Not really. Okay. Yes. You know what I mean?
Gold Peak, you need a sponsor.
Gold Peak,
Dr. Moore
shout
out
out.
here. Okay, see that is the beverage of PhD doctors out here. Okay, so if you are on your path to become a doctor, you need a drink sweet tea.
We have Nia Cole sipping on some ginger turmeric tea with milk and honey. I got the honey too, and I'm tuning in from Tacoma Park, DC. Hello, East Coast peeps.
Hey, welcome.
Yeah, because we got that 4:30 time over here in Cali. People's like, we at work.
People are like, I'm working. What is this, a book club? But yeah, we have to accommodate for both coasts. And people have been watching the replay. So there's definitely been folks that have been tuning in and watching the replays and commenting. So we definitely have been looking at all of your comments. So it's really glad to see that y'all are still engaging, even if it's the replay.
Yes. So our January theme this entire month of January has been rest and reset. So it was just perfect to feature the Nap Ministries book, Rest is Resistance. And we also have been focusing all of our mindful movement classes, our Soul Flow series around rest and the reset. We just had the Pilates one last Sunday. And then our last Soultry event is happening this upcoming Sunday, our Soulscape workshop, which we'll talk more about at the end, but it's going to be this upcoming Sunday, 11 to 12:30 PST. It's a virtual workshop where we focus on mindful movement, setting our intentions for the year, and really cultivating what rest and reset mean to us individually and us as a collective as Soultry Sisters. So we hope you can join us.
Yeah, so the event on Sunday is kind of the culminating event for this first month of the year. So we've been talking about what rest means to us. What does that look like? What does that look like for collective healing? For soul care. So Sunday's event is really tapping into that. So a lot of reflection. And then it's an embodiment practice, which we'll talk about later in the live about somatics and embodiment. And last week we also talked about embodiment. So the event this weekend, this Sunday, is really about experiencing that for yourself. So you'll be able to see feel it in your body, like when you're rested, and what reset means for you as you start this new year. So definitely go to our website, soultrysisters.com,
Mhm.
to learn more about all of our events that are upcoming. So that's our Soulscape event. And then you can also follow us on all platforms, Soultry
Mhm.
Sisters, and be updated on all the things that we're doing.
Yes.
And
And
I
then
was telling, go ahead.
I want to say that we're going to round out our January theme rest and reset with special guest Tricia Hersey. She's going to be joining our final Soultry book club meeting right here on YouTube Live next Wednesday, February
Wednesday.
1st. You don't want to miss. We are so honored to have the Nat Bishop, Tricia Hersey, join us for an intimate Q&A where y'all be able to, discuss how we feel about the book, and she'll be able to share more insights about her experience with the Nat ministry and all that.
Yeah, so we're so honored to have her. That's our first time having the author come to one of our book clubs. So we were super honored when she reached out to us and wanted to be a part of the conversation. We're like, oh my gosh, she knows who we are. So the first 30 minutes next week will be wrapping up the book, so talking about part 4, Imagine, and then the last 30 minutes will be an Q&A with Tricia, the author herself. So super exciting. Let your friends know, let your community know. You don't want to miss it. Same time, same place. Let your folks know. And of course, if you subscribe to our YouTube at Soultry Sisters, you'll be alerted when we go live, so you won't miss it at all. So definitely check it out. And then if you want to learn more, you can go to our website, soultrysisters.com/book club, and we have all the info there. And the links to watch the replays as well. So after every week, the replays are up on YouTube. So you can catch up. If you're just joining for the first time today, you can go back to the replays and all of that good stuff. Awesome. Thank you. So we have a comment here. So Sharon DeLeon says, wow, congratulations to both of you. Thank you. We
Thank you so
appreciate that,
much.
Sharon. We see we have someone from Facebook. We have folks from YouTube commenting. So it's great to see you all. And again, if you're new to the book club, it's very interactive. So as we share, quotes and themes that that we are illuminating, definitely feel free to comment as we go, and then we'll pop up those comments on the screen if you have questions, quotes that you want to share, all that good stuff.
Yes, I also want to invite y'all. This is the time where we're going to start getting into our book club discussion. So if you are with us live or you are watching the replay and you do have the book, this is a great time to have your book with you. If you're like, no, this is part of my rest and resistance practice, you can also just lay down and listen to our good discussion. We do our walking challenge, step and stride. So some of y'all may be listening to this episode during your walk. So we welcome you to engage in a way that works for you. But those of you who have your books out and you want to pull out and read the quotes along with us, we welcome you to do that now.
Yeah, so this week we are talking about part 3, Resist, which for me, I'll go through more specifically once we get into the chapter more deeply. But I did want to share that this week specifically, resistance has been coming up. And I was like, well, thank you, universe, because this is what we're talking about in the book club. So all these different examples and things were handy to come up. Did it feel good? No. But did it help with this discussion? Yes. But I guess before we get into the quotes and stuff, we do want to check in with y'all on how has your rest practice looked like this week. So each week, as we've been going in with our book club, we've been checking in with y'all to see if there's evolution happening, if there's growth happening each week, or if there's some things that are causing more resistance, some things that are making you pause more. Feel free to comment what your rest practice looked like this week. And then also another question was, what is your current relationship to rest? So that's another one. You can feel free to comment below.
To rest. So I can start first with answering the first question is, how has my rest practice looked like this week? My rest practice this week has looked like kind of this theme of resist, finding the moments where I could, like just inserting rest where I could fit it in, because I'm still getting my new teaching schedule in. And so for me, this week I walked to dinner near my studio. So I have a Pilates studio in a downtown area, and I forgot my lunch, y'all. She forgot her lunch, and I told myself, let me just plow through these administrative works so that I can go home because I forgot my lunch. But then a part of me was like, but you're hungry now. And your eyes hurt from staring at this screen. Like, you've been working on this website for like 2 hours. And so something inside me said, go take a walk and go treat yourself to some dinner. And if you go treat yourself to dinner, once you come back, you'll work 1 more hour and you go home. And that felt good. Like, I felt really good. It didn't feel right when I was trying to force myself to continue to plow through an hour. It felt good to stay 2 more hours with a dinner break. So I walked like half a mile to Pollos Maria, one of me and Tony's favorite restaurants in downtown Carlsbad. I got myself a little fish taco and I ate it outside in silence. Okay. I ate it in silence. I sat by myself near this fire, and then I walked back to the studio and I finished my work and I went home and I rested. So for me, it was like my rest looked like creating like new, like just being more spontaneous, I guess, with my rest practice, like allowing myself to adapt and be flexible.
Yeah. I feel like what you're sharing is kind of like you're allowing rest to be a response to kind of like what's happening in your life versus like only scheduled rest. Like, so it's like, oh, if you're feeling like you need rest, then like you just rest.
Right. I was like,
yeah.
Yeah, like, you want to stop now. Like, listening.
And it's just so interesting reading this book because, yeah, it's like when you read it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And then in practice, like, so every Wednesday, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. And then, like, the rest of the week leading up, then I'm like, oh, this actually is,
Yeah,
can be
my rest practice,
challenging.
yeah, that wasn't planned. Like, and then when I got home, I ended up taking my dog Missy for a walk. So that was my planned rest, was like, take Missy on a walk after work, but I wanted to rest more.
Yeah. And then Kyle shares, been keeping up with the journaling practice this week. That's been restful / reflective for me. For sure. Yes. Welcome to the journaling crew. Yes. And Tricia does mention that too. And she also has a lot of reflection questions throughout the book, which has, I feel like for me, cultivated kind of that journaling practice as well. So for me, I feel like my rest practice was challenging this past week because I had like a lot of work events. Like I had a work event that lasted the whole weekend and stuff. So there wasn't necessarily a lot of open space in my schedule for rest, but I did find small times for rest and things like that. And what was I gonna say? Yeah, I feel like especially the beginning of this week, my body and spirit was just like calling, like, we
Sit
need a
down.
rest, we
Lay
need a
down.
rest. And so like Monday night I went to sleep pretty early. And then last night I didn't necessarily go to sleep early, but I was in bed for a while before I actually went to sleep, which is not typical of me, if you know me. So yeah, it's still a challenge. So kind of trying to navigate that and like what that looks like with different things coming up in my life and things like that. And then the second question was like, what's your current relationship to rest? I also wanted to say that my current relationship to rest is that I feel it. Like I'm now feeling, I feel like more in tune with my body and my spirit, especially. I feel like my spirit more so is the one that's calling rest. Like, because sometimes I have been getting enough sleep technically, but my body is still like, nah, like we not doing that. So that has been, I feel like, how it's kind of evolved over the last couple weeks too. I feel like more like in tune to the spiritual aspects of rest, and like my body's more like yearning for spiritual rest, right? When we talk about the 7 types of rest, my body's just like, nah. So that's been interesting.
Yeah, for me, I think my current relationship to rest, if I were to give it like a metaphor, like some type of example, is like I'm currently crushing on rest. Like and I think when you have a crush on someone, you're like curious, you're inquisitive, you're like want to know all about them, like what they look like what they like to do, all this kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm kind of flirting with rest and feeling excited when I like find those creative moments. I'm like, oh, this is rest. This is one of the 7 rests. Like, because I think before my relationship to rest was like going to sleep, taking naps, going on vacation, being off of work. But now after this book and learning the 7 types of rest, I've been like really excited when I snatch a rest moment that like is these new definitions and understanding. And as I'm cultivating this crush, I'm like, I'm getting more of them. I'm like, oh, I'm actually getting more moments of rest when I have an expand thought on it. And we'll talk about that more in this chapter.
Yeah, I do feel that. Yeah, because I feel like my tea rituals have been really essential for me. I've been doing my diffuser with my essential oils to kind of like cultivate the space of rest, and different things like that. Yeah, so definitely, yeah, throughout these weeks, what rest looks like and what it can be has definitely expanded for me as well. So, of course, we're going to get into part 3, chapter 3, resist. Um, and so the first thing that kind of came up in the book that I thought was interesting was like why we resist.
Mhm.
And she mentions this quote that I wanted to add: the idea of resistance is central to the message of rest and to our life as human beings. And yeah, the book title is obviously Rest is Resistance, but I feel like when I first heard about the book, I kind of was like, oh, like kind of what does she mean by that, right? So I feel like
Mhm.
this chapter, she's really going deep and going in on like, this is what I mean, this is why it's important, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, like why she does the work that she does.
Another, oh,
Mm.
another quote is, "We are always resisting in invisible and blatant ways." We're kind of talking about that, with our sharing our
Mhm.
rest for the week, and our soul has very likely already been resisting in ways in which grand culture abuses and pushes us while degrading our divinity. That's page 129. And I was like, that it made me reflect, like, how am I in my own ways resisting? And that can look like many things. I think sometimes like it's not the best form of rest, but sometimes I resist by going on social media, like, oh, I need a break from this.
Mhm.
Let me scroll real quick. So that's something that that's my answer. But then I'm even like
Mhm.
going deeper into that in this chapter. I was like, oh, well, that's also a thing. So that's what this quote kind of illuminated for me, as like a reflection of like what are
Mhm.
the like invisible and blatant ways that we are resisting.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like for me, when I thought of that, I kind of think of like when I snooze in the morning, like I'll have an alarm
Mhm.
and then I'll snooze. And I'm like, that's just the way to just like
That's
my little my body
part
is just
one.
like we're resisting this. We're getting our rest still. So
Let
I feel
let
like
us know
that's
in the
one small
comments. Yeah.
example.
Let us know in the comments what are some invisible and blatant ways you be resisting. Tony mentioned, the snooze button on the alarm clock. I mentioned scrolling, scrolling. Every time I go to the bathroom, I'm like, "Ooh, I'm gonna get my phone." That's why I'm gonna be in there for a minute.
That's what I'm here.
You know what I'm talking about when you at work.
Yeah, that's true.
Hmm.
Hmm. And then Kyle said on grind culture, one of the insidious parts of it is that it teaches us to recode our natural resistance as laziness. That's
Mm,
a project of capitalism. Yes, a
yes.
product, right? Yeah. So it's just that was really illuminating for me too. Just throughout this reading this book is that like laziness, like the urgency, um, productivity, like how all of that falls under capitalism and white supremacy culture and grind culture. And we talked a lot about that on, I think, the intro and part 1, rest.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you are kind of like, oh, what are they talking about? And you go back to those episodes, we really went deep into those aspects.
And go expanding upon Kyle's comment also about like the word like decoding, deprogramming. So like we are coded to think these things. And so part of the resistance is the process of deprogramming. That's what this whole chapter is about. Like if I were to use resist equals deprogramming.
Mm,
That's like the only way we resist is if we're making conscious efforts to deprogram. And what does that
mhm,
look like? And so that goes to the next quote: is to resist means to soften into the powerful proposal of thriving right now, of not waiting for permission from a toxic culture that blocks justice and moves from a spiritually deficient place. Y'all, do you hear that? Moves from a spiritually deficient place.
Mm-hmm. That's what really sticks out to me with this book, especially. Well, given her background, so Tricia's background is in theology,
Mhm.
and then she also has some other things that she's done throughout her experiences. But I feel like that's what really helps me resonate with the book is the spiritual, like how centered it is on the spiritual. Because I feel like sometimes other books talks about these things, but it's not really. I feel like a lot of what really resonates with me is just like that this is our inner knowing and things like that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But and how like to resist means to soften. I think that was also
Often.
language I haven't really heard in that way of like resist and soften in the same sentence because it's like usually with resist, we're like, we gotta go, 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 tear it down, burn it down, which is like also true. But also it's
There's
like
a time for that too.
soften. Yeah, to
Yeah,
soften.
to
Um,
resist means to soften into the powerful proposal of thriving right now. That's that presence. That's when we
mhm,
take that break. That's that pause. That's that
mhm,
silence. That's that deep breath in, exhale out.
mhm. Yeah, so that really resonated with me and like also not waiting for permission to rest because it's like so many times, we're like, oh, like even when you think of like just work culture nowadays is like, oh, can I have a day off or something? It's just like like
Yeah.
this is so like it's not embodied and it's not connected with the
Mhm.
natural state of our bodies and our spirits, right? Like if we just want to rest, like it's really hard to just rest. Like you have to really fight against a culture to find rest.
And I want to expand on that, Tony. Like when you're talking about, the permission, it's like that makes me think of like that voice. So we have like these people on our shoulders. Like here is grind culture and here's our ancestors, right? Here's like, and that's what she's talking about when she's talking about spiritually deficient and toxic culture. It's like when we are denying ourselves a break, when we're denying ourselves rest and not listening to our body, like who's telling us to not do it? Like no one was telling me. I work for myself, y'all. No one was telling me I couldn't go to lunch.
Just
Like
internalized,
it was internalized. I was like,
internalized grind culture.
right. So it's like, who is this? Right. And so in the chapter 2, she talks about like the excerpts of an interview of how our ancestors weren't able to take a lunch break. They either had to bring
Mhm,
lunch with them on the field, on the cotton field, or they had some child or elderly older person bring them food. They couldn't walk to their
mhm.
favorite restaurant. So like literally those are the kind of stories in me that hit me deep to be like, why won't you just go walk and get yourself that fish taco? Like it's not that deep. Like it's deep, but it's also like you can remove yourself from that toxic culture and
Yeah, I think
listen to that spirit inside that says you need to eat. Go outside.
yeah, I think it's something we talked about a lot last week was like the unraveling and
Yeah.
the unlearning and how it is a process. And that's what I appreciate last week too. When we talked about like liberation is a process and it's dynamic and it's lifelong. So it's like, yeah, like these things might still be coming up for us now. That doesn't mean that that we're not doing the work. It's like it's part of the work, right? The work is ongoing. And even maybe some of us right now feel like, yeah, I got this down pack, like I got my rest rituals, but then maybe a different part of our life, right? It might look different. So I appreciate that when she shares like what worked for her and her journey is that like because surrendering to the like things are going to change. It is a lifelong process. You don't have to have it all figured out by the end of this
Mhm.
book. This is just invitations. So we
Mhm.
can unlearn and we can invite spaces for rest and we can shift our mindsets. And that's also so important that we're having collective spaces like this to talk about it, right? So
Mhm.
I'm so excited to have her next weekend as well to just be, integrated into our community. But being able to have these pockets of communal care and rest and to create more spaces like that, I think is how we resist and how we create it softly too, is where like if all of us are resting, I feel like it's a softer space
Mm.
than in, you know, in other places in our culture when it's like you're the only one trying to rest and everyone's like, what are you doing? Versus like if we're all on this journey together, it will be a soft space to land.
And I love how you mentioned community care too, because that brings us to our next point, which is rest as soul care. Ooh, and we have a comment from Kyle. I see the idea of softening as directly against the pressure to operate like a machine. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's what the plantation system wanted from folks as well. And we don't have to operate like that anymore. We don't. We
Mhm.
don't. And that's like part of like the deprogramming, right? Is in like the fact that Tricia takes the time to share those specific stories
Mhm.
really helps to contextualize. And for me, like as a Black person, to understand like the like why it's so important
Mhm.
in honoring our ancestors, why resisting and resting is a way to honor not only just ourselves, but like people before us too.
Mhm.
And to like acknowledge like where it comes from, like Kyle was saying. It's not
Yeah.
a coincidence.
And so rest as soul care, which if you're not familiar already, Soultry Sisters is all about soul care. And so this part of the book was really special for me to read.
Yes.
So Tricia writes, rest is soul care because rest deliberately pays close attention to the deepest parts of you. Rest places soul care at the center of our wellness and liberation. I was like, yes, okay. And that's on page 129. But to to have it, it deliberately pays close attention to the deepest parts of you. And I do feel that. I feel like when I have experienced like deep rest, like full bodied rest, I feel much more in tune with my body, my mind, my spirit. I feel much more connected, much more just like clear, like have clarity of mind, body, spirit too, like to know what's my energy and what's not my energy. Um, so I really felt I was like, oh yeah, I do feel like that is kind of the product of, or not the product, but like how the outcome of rest is feeling this deep connection to self and spirit and all of that stuff.
And I like how the second part too, rest places soul care at the center
Mhm.
of our wellness and liberation. And I love how it's really making it that simple. Like just resting is enough. You don't have to do any painting of the nails,
Mhm.
massage. Like it's as simple as finding space to rest. And that can look different for everybody. So I feel like for me it's always bringing it back to the essence. And for me it felt nice to know that we are aligned with, you know, the work of Tricia and the NAP ministry, and that we're all like a part of this collective care, this collective call to resist um, these oppressive systems. So it almost like really for me like resonated in a place that was deep. That's like, okay, I feel like I have a feeling that there's a lot of us out here that are really invested in doing this work together to get there.
Yeah, and soul care is so deep in our work. Like we've talked about soul care since 2019 when we started, and like we have also used the language as collective since we started. Like Soultry Sisters is an arts and wellness collective. We talk about collective healing. We talk about holistic wellness. We talk about community care, soul care. And so for us, our definition of soul care is mind, body, soul, and community. So we've already had those definitions at the
Mhm.
core root of our work since we started. Um, so hearing other people's works like Tricia's has been very affirming in my journey through Soultry, of that like we're on the right path, that like, you know, we have been connected to our foremothers, our ancestors through doing this work. And that the work that we do in our community also is in you know, aligned with the work that Trisha is doing, the NAP ministry with like all these other folks too. Makes me feel good about just the stuff that we do. It's just like, okay, we're all, you know, wanting to lift all of us up to
Mhm.
have more soul care, to have more rest, to be liberated, that like we're all on this movement together. And I appreciate that she refers to rest and resistance as a movement, because it's like, it's not just
It's not
we're
individual.
doing it, it's her doing it, it's the collective. Like we are all doing it. And a movement is like, I think I also kind of think of a wave, right? Like if we're all,
Mm,
it's collectively gonna have a bigger impact than
mm,
just small here and there.
mm.
So I just appreciate knowing that as well.
I also appreciate with this next quote how Tricia again talks about how rest and resistance is in our relationship to our spirituality, our spirit. And so this quote is resistance is a rich spiritual posture. It opens the possibility for reinvention and connections. To know that we are divine and cared for can allow us to refuse the lies of any oppressive system. And that also taps
Mhm,
into like the enoughness of us, that we're worthy,
mhm,
that it's our birthright. It's not a leisure. She shared a quote the other day saying, like, rest is not a privilege. It's not a luxury.
mhm.
It's our birthright. It's like, it's our divine, like, thing. It's our divinity. And so that this quote right here, just, I love how she says resistance is a rich spiritual posture.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes into the next
Yeah.
section as rest as a political statement. So yeah, when she posts and like when people talk about like, oh, I can't rest because it costs too much, or I can't rest because of all XYZ lists the many, many, reasons why people say they can't rest, and especially like people of color and black folks. And um that's what really came up for me this week is that like for me, like I guess how rest has been showing up in my life is that like I have been in a space of trying to advocate more for restful spaces, for honoring my capacity and things like that. And I had a conversation with black women like at work who were like, rest is not for me. Like I can't rest like my ancestors, my elders, like grind culture, like we just get it done. And I was just like, yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way. I was like, that's not my ministry. Like reading this book
Mhm.
for this past month has really helped me unlearn that like that is not for me. Like, yes, that's what the culture has like socialized us and indoctrinated us to feel like it's for us. And maybe our elders have done that, but that was for survival, right? And right when she
Oh,
mentioned
survival.
that the rest is for a thriving space, right? Not survival. So it's like, I just urge Black women to really reflect and like take a moment to be like, why do I not think rest is for me? Um, and yes, there's like different tangible things that do make it challenging. But we'll kind of get into that in a little bit with some of these other quotes. But I really was shooketh that like, wow, like Black women really are not feeling like this is for us. And I want it to be, I want
Mhm.
more Black women to feel more like, how Trisha writes and how we are feeling through this discussion that like it's accessible. Like I want it to feel accessible to folks. And that was
Mhm.
really illuminating this week that like folks
Mhm.
are really resisting. So that's why I thought it was interesting that this week's chapter is resisting because I was like, yo, like I feel this resistance. And I really push back of like, I invite you to come to this book club because that's not true
Mhm.
for our community. Like our community deserves to rest. And there are ways to achieve that.
Yes, and it's a part of it's already been written by our ancestors. Like we have ancestors that rest. Like she talks about our
Hmm.
ancestor Harriet Tubman and how the reason why she was so successful with the Underground Railroad is because she paused, she prayed, she listened to nature. She was very connected to nature. She was connected to spirit. And so that too, like a person who accomplished so much, eh, she paused and she prayed. So it is
Hmm.
of us. It is of
Hmm.
us. And so that for me, like those examples is what like reminded me like this is for you. This is for us.
Hmm.
And so, quotes that we want to share, talking about rest as a political statement, is our rest movement is a political and social justice movement rooted in our collective rest, like what you were trying to tell Tony, like what you're trying to say. You're
Hmm.
trying to invite rest, and we must resist together. We must liberate together. We must rest together. And so, again, Tricia is a poet, so she is
Hmm.
very deliberate with how
Hmm.
she writes these words.
Hmm. Yeah, just that communal aspect I think is so important, right? It's like yes, if I rest and my practice is amazing, if I'm creating this sanctuary of rest, that's great for me, but that's not going to liberate. That's like that's not going to have that communal healing and stuff. So that's why I was so like, I invite y'all to be a part of this movement because I was just like, it does us a disservice collectively if it's only me doing it.
Yeah,
Like
it's
it's for
different how
all of
we
us.
engage too. Yeah, we make space for
Mhm,
us to rest and others. And the other quote is any system, here's a good one, y'all. Any
mhm.
system that degrades and ignores our divine right to have care, rest, leisure, and space must be examined and illuminated. It must be side-eyed. You know what I
It
mean?
must be brought down.
It
Okay.
must be any
Yeah, and it's
system.
like any system, and she also mentions ignores our divine right, right? So it's our divine right. It is our birthright that, and we mentioned this last week. Like babies innately know how to rest. You're not just telling a baby like, "Hey, you need to sleep now." Like it's gonna be like, "Oop, I need to rest."
Anywhere, at
It's
any
like
moment.
yes, it's like our birthright. That's like what our souls and our bodies know to be true. So it's like we've been conditioned and programmed to function otherwise, but that's just in a state of like shock and unhealthy toxicity. But really, our divine right is for care, is for rest, for leisure, right? That goes into that play
Yes.
and space, right? So just to have space to just be is also our divine right. So I think that's really important too when yes going to this next topic, so cultivating a third space, right? So like what does that mean? So
Yes, and I say that because you're emphasizing space, so
mhm,
that third space, and if y'all not familiar with third space, Tricia gives it a definition, and we can expand upon that too. At third space is a temporary space of joy and freedom. And you're like, "Okay,
mhm,
that sounds really abstract." Is it and I think she did that on purpose, like, third space is a temporary place of joy and freedom, but some people might also know as third space as the space in between. So let me just follow me.
mhm,
So we have 1, 2, and 3 spaces. The first space is our home space. That's, like, where you live, where you go to sleep, where you do your thing. The second space is our work life. Our life outside of our home is the second space, your work. And then third space are the places in between that can be like Soultry Sisters, that can be a local coffee shop, a community center, the library, you know.
mhm,
Third spaces have different types of forms and shapes. So when Trisha's mentioning the third space, she's talking about a temporary place of joy and freedom. So any place where you feel a temporary place of joy and freedom, that's your third space. So let us know
mhm.
in the comments where's your third space?
Yeah, that could be anywhere, which goes into the next quote. So when we talk about rest, so it's we recline, curate, and create moments of rest wherever we can. So I also appreciate that when we talk about a third space, is that it could be wherever. It could be your third space is when, like Trisha mentions, her grandma Aura is just closing her eyes. That could be a third space. Your third space could be, for me, I think my room is a sanctuary that I've cultivated where I have like my
Mhm.
candles, I have my plants, I have my altar, my crystals, like essential oils, incense, all that stuff, which is like a safe space for me where I do find joy, I find
Mhm.
freedom, I find peace. So yeah, it could be wherever, and I think that goes into, especially when we're talking about like rest as like political and rest as resistance, that like it doesn't have to look like these commodified like things, images, and examples of rest. So it doesn't. It is nice sometimes to have the nice sound baths with all the like chimes and the blankets and stuff. But that's just one example of a rest space, of a third space.
Mhm.
But there's so many more. And also, I think what's important, what we learn from the book, is that it's personal. So your rest space
Mhm.
is personal. So what feels good for me is going to look different than Alyssa, than the next person, from Trisha, and so on. So I think that's important too. When there is that resistance of like, oh, I can't rest. It's like maybe you can't do what my rest looks like, but you can still find rest for yourself. And so I think that's also where the
Mhm.
liberation aspects come in, when people really own rest for themselves and own, like what Trisha
Mm.
mentions, their bodies are sites of liberation. So whatever your body, mind, spirit feels good for you, when you own that and know that this feels good for me, then I think all of the other outcomes of rest, you'll start to feel, right? The softness and all of that.
Mm. Thank y'all for sharing in the comments. We got Christina saying going for walks and nature being the third space. We got Kyle saying creating a virtual third space with friends every Wednesday evening on a group call. Love that.
Yes.
And I have to shout out this one too. Side-eyeing a lot of academia today. That's when we're talking about any system. We got a side eye that does not let us rest. And then
Yeah.
this one too, sorry. Collective rest as a labor action. I like that.
Yes, exactly. Well, also because Kyle, Dr. Moore works in labor and all that stuff. Sorry, I feel like I now trivialize what you do, Kyle, like all that
We just
stuff.
every week we get
General,
reminded. This
I'm just
Kyle's a
like,
doctor.
yeah.
Dr.
And
Moore.
when you think of labor action too and collective rest, I think someone had made a comment one of the other weeks, it might have been Kyle, but about like the 4-day work week, right? Like
Mhm.
that being a policy shift, a policy change
Yes.
to embody this collective rest,
Yes.
right? And like remote work, I think the way I'm able to have more restful spaces in my routine and my lifestyle right now is because I work remotely. And so I think of those types of policies and stuff are really important when we're thinking about what does it truly mean to have this collective rest.
I agree. And we got some other quotes we want to share in this third space ideas. Like, we cannot afford to wait for the powers that be to create space for us to have moments of deep rest and care. We can't afford to wait.
Mhm.
So we have to cultivate these third spaces for ourselves.
Mhm.
It doesn't cost anything. It shouldn't have to. And another one is grind culture has placed fear as our only compass and keeps us frozen in a way that is now a habit. And for me,
Mhm.
I appreciated her saying like it has placed fear as our only compass. And so
Mhm.
with that, like cultivating that third space, like, we can be generous with creating spaces for rest. We don't have to be fearful because it's going to be based on what we're comfortable with. Like a lot of people are like fear, like I can't rest because I has to be here.
Mhm.
Like it can be anything. You can't say I fear rest because I'm going to lose money. I'm going to lose.
Mhm.
No, you can literally rest however you want. So there's no fear in making rest a practice because it's
Yeah.
based off of what you want.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the resistance, right? I think why a lot of folks are resistant is because they fear what rest could truly mean for their lives, right? Because maybe that means like letting go and surrendering things that like don't align with a restful life for themselves, or they fear that, by it's also like we talked about like the abundance and scarcity mindset. Like I feel like the fear from grind culture also makes people think of scarcity of like, oh, well, if I'm
Mhm.
resting, then I'm not making money, or then I'm not gonna be seen as, the best
I'm not
worker
gonna be
at
a top.
work, or yeah, or like I'm not gonna be seen as like the best parent or the best blah blah blah. But it's just like when you rest and when as a collective, if we're all resting, then it's more so from a space of abundance and we're able to pour into others because we poured into ourselves first, right? So that's an
Mhm.
analogy that we use a lot as well. So yeah, I feel like that this quote specifically really resonated with me of like just grand culture placing a fear on us. And that creates a habit, right? Like habits can be good or bad. Like you can have a habit to drink like a bunch of water every day, or you can have a habit to where you're like, indulging in grind culture. Like it's just, they're all habits and it is something that you can unlearn. I think that's also helpful when you think of it as a habit, is that it's something that you do have, the agency, the power, the control to shift, right? Like
Mhm.
with the right supports and resources, you're able to. It doesn't mean that like, oh, because we exist in grand culture, then like we're just stuck here. I think that's what this book really illuminates as well, is that like there are other ways and our spirit does already know those other ways of knowing, and it's more so reclaiming that, remembering, and
Mhm.
getting back to that.
Yes.
So it's more just a journey into remembering.
And then Dinah shares, I'm tired of being resistant. I feel that. And I
Mm,
think that goes back to what Kyle was saying too about like absolutely labor action is how we got 6 and 5 day weekends too. So at some point, like we can't just like put it upon ourselves to get creative with our rest. Like, although like you know, that's
Mhm.
a part of the journey. Overall, we need like that, the movement to influence a big shift so that we are
Mhm.
having, you know, maybe 4-day weeks, the work from home,
Mhm.
like, you know, a higher standard of living, like just so we can rest. So I totally
Mhm.
agree. Like it's that point too. Like there we can only
Yeah.
do so much in the
Yeah.
context of what she's saying.
I think that goes into the next question that Trisha mentions in the book, because she'll have like different questions throughout to reflect. And she says, what can liberation like what liberation can you craft outside of grind culture?
Mhm.
Right? So when we think of grind culture, we do think of these things, right? As like, working long hours, not being able to rest, like not having moments of peace, not having, you know, being connected to your body. So, like, what liberation can you craft that's not that? And I think that's what's super freeing is that, like, you create it, you cultivate it. Like, it doesn't have to look like anything that we've seen before, which we'll go into next week when we talk about Imagine. But yeah.
I think this chapter during like in certain parts she's priming us for
Mhm.
the last chapter. And so then she talks about somatics. And fun fact, in this chapter, Tricia talks about how taking a dance class while she was in
Mhm.
school helped her to find moments of creative rest and to connect to her body. So we're going to share some quotes from that section of the chapter. And we start off with the connection to your body is a spiritual experience. And as a person who's a somatic practitioner, as being a dancer all my life and being really having movement a part of my spiritual practice, like I can attest to this. Like when I'm in my body, when
Mhm.
I'm present and just moving, that's when I feel a spiritual experience. So yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, she mentioned a specific example of taking ballet at her university, and both Alyssa and I did dance in college as well. So I do remember taking dance classes too. So it was just we really resonated with like her examples because we're like, oh, we feel it so much.
Mhm.
Um, and what was I gonna say? Yeah, and it's like the next quote, which I wanted us to really sit with when we think about somatics, right, we think about how you're connected to your body, how
Mhm.
you embody things yourself.
Mhm.
So this question is, how can we build systems of care if we don't even care for our own bodies and the bodies of others? Right? And I think that is so important also in the work that we do, right? Like we're, arts and wellness, practitioners. So like how can we show up for others and create these spaces?
Mhm.
Like how can we say, oh, we're cultivating a space for rest if we're not honoring ourselves and giving ourselves rest? And like then the work I do in like women's health is like how can I, tell these women
Mhm.
to do all these things to care for themselves if I'm not doing it myself? So I think that's important too when you're on this journey of knowing that yes, we are unlearning the system of white supremacy, grind culture, but we're also crafting new systems. And it's like if these new systems aren't accessible to ourselves, then how are we even going to have others be in this same system that we're dreaming up?
And I love how she spent a good amount of time in this chapter talking about her experience with taking the dance classes. And she talked about spinning and spotting. And for me, how I received that visual in the chapter is like our ability to spot as we're turning is the practice of rest. So if we continue to
Hmm.
have cultivate a strong practice of rest, no matter how the world tips and twirls and turns us, we'll be able to find center.
Hmm.
You know, that's why it's a deep practice. And practice doesn't mean perfect. It means like it's a map to find your way back. Practice coming back,
Hmm.
the practice of coming to our center. And I loved how she used dance because I got it. I was like, yes, I know the feeling of like when you finally can spot and you could do so many turns. So no matter how much you're spinning and twirling, you
Hmm.
can always find yourself. So I thought that was a
Hmm.
really, really cool way to show how to embody her message.
Yeah, and so somatics, if you're not familiar, it's just, like different things, practices that connect to your body. And if you're interested, if you're curious, you're like, oh, I read this chapter, you hear us talking about somatics and embodiment, definitely come to our event that's virtual this Sunday. So it's called Soulscape. So it's a somatic embodiment practice where we do mindful movement. There's mantras, affirmations, meditation, a lot of reflecting. And it's a way to connect to your body. Because Tricia mentions in like previous chapters and previous lives, we mentioned this of how white supremacy and grind culture takes us out of our body, where it makes us, dissociate. And so these practices of giving ourselves care, rest, helps us come back to ourselves, which is so powerful. Which goes into the next section as resistance as a spiritual practice, because kind of like you mentioned, being a map. So resistance is a spiritual practice and a practical map. We learn how to make a way by building as we go. So I also appreciated this quote, and when she's talking about we're building as we go, right? Like this is new for a lot of us, right? Like we haven't always had the map for these things. Like sometimes now we're just getting like a blank maybe map of the terrain of the land, and we're trying to navigate our ways, right? Our path. We're creating our own path to resistance and liberation and healing. And so, yeah, it's like we don't have to have it figured out. It doesn't have to be like, okay, I need to know steps 1A through Z on how to rest. It's like, no, it's like you just figure it out as you go.
This goes into the second quote, like the foundation for resistance lies in our ability to connect, listen, and repair what has been done to us due to grinding ourselves like a human machine. So like the foundation is like repair. Like the foundation is repairing ourselves, reconnecting, listening. And I really appreciated her, reminding us like a human machine, like we're due to us grinding ourselves like a human machine. The foundation to our resistance will be like in the softness, in the laying down, in the pause. And I really appreciate that she's really reshaping my relationship to the word resist.
And when we talk about resistance being spiritual, she talks about spirit work is about knowing that work has already been done by our ancestors. And that quote, when I read it, I was like, yes, like, because
Highlight.
so many times, I feel like with like when we're in grind culture, white supremacy culture, it's just like you got to go, do to prove yourself. And this quote itself is saying that we don't have to, because our ancestors have already done so much that we should now not have to overwork ourselves, because that's discounting all the work that they've already done for us.
Yeah, it's the acknowledgement for sure.
And to know that they have these practices that we also inherit, right? Because people do talk about, like we inherit this like generational trauma, but we also inherit this spirit work of our ancestors. We inherit the rest practices of our ancestors. We inherit, the healing and the liberation that our ancestors have also paved the way of. So it's also, I think, reframing that it's not necessarily all this like negative stuff that have been inherited and passed down, but also all these healing things that we might not actually we've taken for granted and not realize how important they have been for the movement and for us, like just as individuals and as a community.
I want to share Kyle's comment. That's one thing I especially loved about this chapter, the emphasis on how much of this is experimental and grounded in innovation and improvisation, just figuring it out in real time. Yes, I agree. That's the creative part, the creative element, that reimagining.
Yeah. And I think that goes into the next section, which is the politics of refusal, which he really talks about like the resistance is refusing to be a part of this grind culture, white supremacy culture, colonialism. That when we refuse, right, like we are stepping onto this path of rest. And like last week, we did talk a little bit more about kind of Black liberation and Black resistance and what that looked like. But she mentions the ministry. So the NAP ministry is guided by the deep beauty of Black resistance, Black scholarship, Black history, Black leadership, maroonage, and crafting systems of care outside of the dominant culture, right? So all of this is rooted in, Black liberation history and their leadership and their innovation to create communities of care outside of white supremacy and colonialism. So this has been in our blood. This has been in our histories. This has been here. So it's not we're not new to this, we're true to this, right? And
Yes,
so
and she shares the history of the Maroons, like the American
mhm,
Maroons. And honestly, before she mentioned it, I didn't know about the American Maroons.
mhm,
So I appreciate how she like said like she didn't learn until she was like in her 40s and her
mhm,
studies, and how yeah, like part of this work, this work that she's doing is showing us that this is already a part of us. Like the
mhm,
enoughness is there, the divine right to rest. We've already been,
mhm.
or the refusal. People have been refusing this already.
Yeah. Which goes into the next quote. So, a call to refuse grind culture, to create temporary spaces of rest and
Mm.
space no matter what. So, no
That's the no
matter
matter what
what.
part. No matter
Hmm.
what, pockets.
Yeah. So, it's truly a deep mental shift to thrive in a place with no pause button. And I just
Mm.
want us all to take that in, right? To create temporary spaces of rest and space no matter what. And it's a deep mental shift, right? So it's not, going to happen overnight. It's a lifelong journey, like we talked about last week. But I also appreciate that she says to create these temporary spaces of rest, right? It doesn't have to be like every time it looks like this thing or it's this big ordeal. It could just be, oh, closing my eyes to, just
Yeah, and that's
connect
how
the
she got
spirit.
through grad school, was like the naps
Hmm.
in the library, like if I couldn't nap, looking out the window. And I just reflect on my college experience, and I'm like, I
Hmm.
definitely had to have pockets. I mean, I wasn't as intentional as she was, but the body and the mind, like the body will resist, like in its own way.
Hmm.
Like this book is just a guide to being more intentional about it,
Hmm.
but the body will resist.
Hmm. It goes into the next quote. So, do not let your lack of money and possessions make you feel negative about your worth as a human being, right? And then she goes into talking about how, you know, if you don't have access to certain things like money or status, then folks would think that, like, oh, this isn't for me. That, like, so she does talk about, like, don't let poverty and things like that make you feel that rest isn't for you. So she does talk about that as well. So she is really
Yeah.
radical in her
Mhm.
approach to rest. That it's not this like fluffy la la thing of like, oh, like we're all just gonna rest. Like she's not like that. Like she's really rooted in this, right? Like she herself, her lived experience is because she had to craft and cultivate a restful space because she didn't have all of this. And so I appreciate her mentioning that too, like really rooting it in like if it's not accessible to folks, then it's not rest. So your
Well,
rest.
to me, this quote makes me think of people who, I don't know if you've heard of the term like early, like retire early, fire people. I don't
Oh
know the
yeah.
term. Maybe someone in this live knows, but a lot of people talk about like make a lot of money now so that you can
Mhm.
retire early and like be living life with like resting. Like they're selling
Mhm.
grind now to rest later. And I
Mhm.
think this quote for me made me think of that. And I was like, yeah, don't let your lack of money and possessions, like lack of like having a whole bunch of money in the bank and possessions of assets, a
Mhm.
home. I'm not a homeowner, make you feel negative about your worth as a human being. I'm like, I needed to hear that because I'm at the
Mhm.
age where I'm starting to think of all those things. And that gets me to want to grind. It makes me want to hustle. But
Mhm.
this is making me like find that balance. It's like, nah, you're enough. And everything moving forward is going to be a choice, not a response
Mhm.
to the fact that you don't have money or possessions.
Yeah. And that like I think also what this book is talking about is that like your work, like the things that you do, like your purpose, like your impact in
Mhm.
your community does not have to be reliant on, making money or like how productive you are. I think that is something that I think a lot of us do need to unlearn of like our worthiness does not have to be attached to these like tangible
Mhm.
things here or these material things that she just mentioned like you're worthy just because you're alive. Like that's it.
Yeah.
Whether you work another day in your life, whether anyone comes up to you and says you made an impact on their life, it doesn't matter. Like you're worthy and you can still
Mhm.
rest.
Mhm.
And I think that's truly powerful as well, just being wound up in grind culture that we do feel these pressures.
Yeah, and I think it goes into the like a quote, your body is a site of liberation. Rest in your true power. Like, just rest in your true power.
Yeah. So all of that is just, yeah, like what she mentions is the politics of refusal. So like when you're
Yeah,
refusing, you're like, no, my body is the liberated site. So like it
right.
doesn't matter all these other things you're trying to do because I have rest and I have power in my rest.
And I also love how she also says you don't have to always be creating, doing, and contributing to the world. That goes into that, like, you are worthy of rest. And also, rest is a generative space. When you are
Mhm.
resting your body, it is in its most connected state. That, to me, I was like, wait, what? Say it
Mhm.
again. When you are resting, your body is in its most connected state. Your organs are regenerating. Your brain is processing new information. So it's almost like vital. Like, why are we
Mhm.
refusing? Like, the politics of refusal is also so that we can receive
Mhm.
from resting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like our bodies will get rest, like not the full body rest that we talk
Mhm.
about, but if you're sleep deprived, your body will shut off and get sleep. Or if you are hungry, your body's gonna tell you. So like it is also knowing that inner knowing that like our bodies and our spirits know. Like I said, right now I'm going through the need for spiritual rest, and my spirit is telling me like, girl, we need to rest. Like it knows what a rested state
Mhm.
feels like. Like my brain doesn't have to tell my spirit that I
Yeah.
need rest. And I think that's so important to think about, and also just rest as a generative space. I also think of like how she mentioned, like last week we talked about dreaming. So like
Dreamy.
when you're rested, like that helps you do the work, right? Of like not
Hope.
the work in like I meant the work as in healing and the
Mhm.
work as in the movement we're on. So when you're
Yeah.
rested, then you have this generative space where you can dream, where you can imagine,
And
where you
hope.
can
That
create,
radical
yeah,
faith.
hope, yeah, and create these new realities. So it's like if we're not rested, that's why we're thinking inside the box still. But it's like when we come
Mhm.
from a rested space, that's when these expansive, thoughts and dreams can come in and we can actually truly embody them from a
Mhm.
rested space.
It's not last quote we want to share is, and I think this is important, and we've been talking about this like every week, is she says,
Mhm.
I believe any work that is rooted in wellness and justice and doesn't include the collective without a framework about dismantling and decolonizing is incomplete work.
Mhm.
And
Exactly.
we have, because there's a lot of buzz now about, like, wellness and resting. There's a lot of people, selling wellness, selling it
Mhm.
to you. And I think it's important, like, don't get got by people who are selling you wellness and they're not coming from the framework about dismantling and decolonizing. And
Mhm.
her book is their example of like what it looks like to be from a dismantling and decolonized framework lens when it talks about rest and wellness.
Mhm.
And to me, like, this quote in this book is affirming, and also kind of an inspiration, a North Star for like how Soultry like navigates and how
Mhm.
we make choices and what we do, because we really want to be a part of this overall collective movement, to be rested, to be whole, to have community care and collective healing.
Yeah. And also, like when she mentions like any work that isn't rooted in the collective, like that's not this movement. And I think that's so important. Like I said, like when I hear people resisting rest, that's when I'm more like, no, like please come, please, like I invite you to, experience this rest with
Mhm.
me because it is a collective, experience. And for the movement, it's like I would just be doing my community a disservice if I was just like, I'm just rested in my little sanctuary. Like no, like yeah, it's hard to have these conversations and that resistance, there's that tension and it takes time, it takes work. But I just me being on my where I'm at in my journey, I did feel called to be like,
Mhm.
instead of just sitting there and being like, oh, that's great that y'all grind. I was like, no, like please open up your hearts and minds to see that there's other ways out there, right? There's other truths than what we know to be true, that we can imagine and create other realities.
Yes, exactly. And so we want to leave y'all with a final a final question to think about. Feel free to answer now or just write it in your journal, ponder on it, rest on it. How do we create a resistance that feels like home?
Hmm. and whatever home means for you. So again, as you're reflecting in the next week, to yeah, think about how you do that in your day to day as well. That doesn't have to be such lofty ideas, like it can be that, but also, yeah, like how do you craft a resistance that feels like home in your day to day lifestyle? So I think that's really important. And especially next week, as we talk about imagining, right? We've done this work for the last few weeks of the month of, learning about what rest means, learning about dreaming, about resisting. And next week we'll close out with imagine. So, how all of this can help us imagine, new realities, healing, liberation for our communities and for ourselves. So, definitely join the conversation next week. Again, Tricia Hersey, the author herself, will be joining us. So next week, tune in to YouTube at Soultry Sisters or Facebook Live. We're also on Facebook. Oops, something fell down. But Trish will be joining us. So the first half will finish out Imagine 30 minutes. And then the last 30 minutes will be a Q&A with Trisha. So super excited for that. Tell your friends, tell your family, post it online because you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be super, super dope. Super excited to have us joining us and super grateful for you all to be here.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm happy you were able to join us tonight, Dinah. And for those of you like who, for me, a reflection to that question is like, how do we craft a resistance that feels like home for Soultry? It's what we're going to be doing on Sunday. Like we share practices, rest practices, creative practices, wellness practices that are really near and dear to our heart, that really resonate with us. And we impart that by sharing it with you. And then we also welcome those of who are in community with us to share what works for them. So we really cultivate a place to share, to embrace, embody, and empower each other to really honor ourselves. So we welcome you to join us this Sunday. We welcome you to join us next Wednesday. If you haven't yet, definitely go to our website and sign up for our email list so you can get more get all the updates and also learn more about our book club. If you're just joining, this is your first time, you can catch the other replays. And then we'll see you on the next Soultry Hangout.
Yes, we'll see you next week. Stay rested, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.